So, welcome back to another Thursday on the Pagan Perspective. I'm your Thursday host, Yeka, and this is Mr. Moose, who will be making lots of noise. He does not like to be picked up. And this week we're talking about highly sensitive persons, people. Our topic comes from Niina. It's going to be in the description box below. I'm going to paraphrase it here. And they have three different kind of components to the question. So the first is, are you familiar with the term highly sensitive person? So I had come across the term, I had heard it before, but it wasn't something that I used in everyday vocabulary, and it wasn't something that I'd done a lot of research on. So when this topic came up, I went ahead and I watched her video and did some reading. She linked to, I think it's hspeople.com, which is a website that the person who coined the term has put up. And then I also watched the videos that the previous host did just to kind of get an idea of what, where I could go with this topic and what something new I could add to. And I found particularly Angel's video this week was just superb. So if you haven't watched, I really encourage going back and taking a look at what she did. Her video is a little bit longer, and so is Niina's, but they both go through and talk about each of the qualifications or categories. So I'm going to assume that you guys have a little bit of exposure to it already and just sort of jump in. If not, you can check out the website. It's linked in the topic below. So the next part is, do you think you are a highly sensitive person? So, or people that you know are. So I went ahead, and on that website there's a little quiz that you can take, which kind of gives an idea of, you might want to consider that you could be a highly sensitive person or not. So you answer the questions, and the higher you score, the more likely you are, and the lower, the less likely you are. So I scored very high on that. However, that's not a label which I really identify with. Obviously, I wasn't super familiar with the term before, but even after going through it, for me, I am a non-neurotypical individual and have for pretty much my whole life, since I was a very young child, had several diagnoses, which I think would explain a lot of the characteristics, not all of them, but a lot of the characteristics. And those are already labels that I identify with, some of which could be considered opposites, although the more you learn about it, the more you learn that the mass, the popular conceptions of these particular things are rather off. And that's another topic that I'd actually be quite willing to share with folks, but it's way too long for this video and it's not on topic. So at another point, I'd love to talk to you guys about being a member of the neurodiverse community and these particular things which are technically labeled as disorders. But in my life, and this part is relevant to the video, I promise, I have used a different framework. And it was something that, has helped as I was raised to see it this way as well, although I was not particularly aware of the labels as a child. It was something that I found out reading my own paperwork later on as an adult. But instead of looking at them as diseases or disorders, decided to look at them as ways that my brain functions and works. Just the way that I am, instead of as disorders. And by learning about how I worked, I could develop strategies to manage those, and even manage isn't quite the right word, to live in a way that recognizes that that's the way I am, and to find ways to take the features about me and make them into strengths. So there are several different elements which were talked about, or characteristics for highly sensitive people. The ones that really kind of stuck out to me with some of the sensory processing, which is one of the things that I have. That was talked about, like the sensitivity to loud noises or lights or something, and that's, for me, it's a tactile issue. But there was that, there was the introvert or the being overwhelmed to media, and those are all things that for me can be super intense and difficult to deal with, depending on how I've been managing the rest of my life. And so I would think that for someone in the highly sensitive category that would be dealing with very similar things, that there might be some similar strategies, that just because it's really bothersome at one point doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be really bothersome at another point, depending on what else is going on. So that really kind of brings us to the third question, which has to do with, and I've got my notes down here, sorry, the connection. Do we think that there's a connection between paganism or earth-based paths and spiritualities and highly sensitive people or highly sensitive traits, as well as are people, do you think that highly sensitive people are drawn to paganism? So the connection that I think is there, and there's a lot of them, but one that is really exciting and kind of empowering, I think, is that in many forms of paganism, we have a lot of tools that really help us to learn about ourselves, whatever set of labels that we end up using, but that can help us with that self-reflection, and then tools to help us manage those, whatever it is, and whether somebody is highly sensitive or has ASD or whatever it is, or not, right? Doesn't identify with any of that. Everybody has their struggles, everybody has their strengths, and everybody works, their brains work in a certain way, and we get to learn that about ourselves. And we have tools in paganism, again, not every path, but many groups that we usually call it magic, but different forms of meditation, ritual, divination, things that we can use to help us manage. And I can't really say specifically what it would be, because every single individual is different and needs to find what it works for them and whatever the particular issue is. So I think that's really exciting that we have tools as pagans to deal with that. In terms of highly sensitive people being drawn to paganism, or do we think that a lot of them are in it? I think that highly sensitive people are already a little bit different, and when you're, and not in a bad way, just like they're slightly marginalized, and when you already are a little bit different, it's so much easier to do another thing that's different. There's less resistance, right? Because you've already dealt with being different, or you're already experiencing being different. So when you find something that's a little bit different, and paganism isn't really part of the mainstream, it's kind of off to the side, it's easier to do something that you already, basically, it's easier to do it because you don't have to fight that it's different, because you already are different and you've already fought that fight. So I think that is one thing that helps a lot of already kind of marginalized groups, whether that's LGBT or the particularly sensitive individuals or whatever it is, that kind of helps us move in that direction already. But there's also an element of the experiential element, and many forms of paganism are very focused on the experience of the individual and how it feels to practice, more so than the belief. Beliefs are important, but a lot of pagan paths are about the practice element. And it seems like folks who are highly sensitive may be already very in tune with their experiences and focus very much on how things feel, so it could be a really good fit. Let's see. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and this was not part of the kind of 3 topics there, but when I watched Niina's video, they made a comment about feeling really relieved when discovering the term of highly sensitive person and figuring out that that was something that they identify with and they are. And that, you know, I really smiled from that and really kind of, it, you know, felt that, because that's something that I've experienced with some of the other groups. And I think it's really empowering, which is why I think that terms, labels and terms like highly sensitive person can be a really positive, empowering thing, because it can help somebody find that community and camaraderie and help them to understand themselves in different frameworks and different perspectives, maybe in a deeper way than they could before. So, you know, I think that's really beautiful and powerful. I also caution a little bit, because it's very easy when we find labels like that, that we can easily slip into an us versus them mentality, which I think isn't often very constructive. So as long as we're staying within it, as long as we're not demonizing those who don't fit the label, it can be really, really powerful. And that's one of the things that I think is also great about the pagan community is that camaraderie that we all have and that understanding about ourselves. So I think I've probably taken this video much longer than I was intending to. So can be a bit of a sensitive topic, but I would love to hear from you guys in the comments section underneath if you consider yourself to be a highly sensitive person, or if any of these particular traits are ones that you relate with, and if you know anybody, what your thoughts on the topic are. Be looking forward to reading that from you folks, and then next week is Subs Week, and I will see you the week after that. So, okay, take care.